What if the most important message you ever received came from someone you'd never know? Picture this: a fragile piece of parchment, yellowed with age, its edges worn by time. No signature, no clues about who wrote it or why, just words that have echoed across centuries, leaving historians and everyday readers alike grasping for answers. This isn't just any letter, it's the oldest known anonymous letter in existence, a silent whisper from the past that refuses to fade away. Think about the power of anonymity, how it can shield a writer, spark revolutions, or even plant seeds of doubt that grow into towering mysteries. This letter did all of that and more. Its origins are shrouded in shadows, its author a ghost in the annals of history, yet its influence is undeniable. It's inspired artists to create, writers to question, and cultures to rethink the very nature of truth and identity. Why would someone go to such lengths to hide their name? Was it fear, defiance, or something even deeper, a message so potent it had to stand on its own, separate from the person who penned it? Today, we're stepping into that mystery. We'll trace the letter's journey from its cryptic beginnings to its unexpected role in shaping the world we live in now. Along the way, you'll see how a single piece of paper challenged empires, fueled legends, and became a symbol of the timeless human desire to speak without being seen. This isn't just a story about the past. It's about how anonymity, then and now, gives voice to the voiceless and power to the powerless. So settle in. Because by the end of this journey, you'll never look at an unsigned note the same way again. The letter was found by sheer accident, buried in a dusty corner of a monastery library where it had sat untouched for centuries. A scholar flipping through a crumbling volume of religious texts noticed something odd: a loose sheet pressed between the pages, so thin it nearly dissolved at the touch. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, just another scrap of parchment in a place filled with them. But the handwriting was different, not the neat, practiced script of a monk copying scripture, but something hurried, almost desperate. The ink had faded to a rusty brown, yet the words still carried a weight that demanded attention. Whoever wrote this message went to great lengths to ensure it would survive. The parchment was carefully folded, hidden in a book that would be handled with reverence, passed down through generations, and the contents far from random scribbles. The words formed a warning, a cryptic plea about betrayal, power, and secrets too dangerous to name. Scholars who first translated it assumed it was a fragment of some long-lost poem or a monk's private musings. But the more they studied it, the clearer it became. This was no ordinary note. It was deliberate, urgent, and utterly anonymous. The mystery only deepened when experts examined the ink and parchment. The materials matched those used in the 12th century, but the style of writing didn't fit any known scribe from that era. There were no seals, no marks of ownership, not even a single initial to hint at the author's identity. Just those haunting words floating in time without an anchor. Why go through the trouble of writing something so carefully, only to strip it of any clue to who wrote it? Was the author someone powerful, hiding their involvement in a scandal, a heretic fearing persecution, or perhaps a prisoner, slipping a final message into the world before vanishing forever? Theories exploded among historians. Some argued the letter was part of a larger, lost correspondence, one piece of a puzzle we'll never fully solve. Others believed it was meant to be found, a deliberate act of defiance against an era where names carried the weight of life and death. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: this fragile piece of parchment had survived wars, fires, and the slow erosion of time, all to deliver a message its author refused to sign. And that refusal, that bold anonymity, is what makes it unforgettable. Because when a voice speaks across 8 centuries without a name, it forces us to listen not to who said it, but to what they dared to say. The words on that fragile parchment are few, but they strike like a hammer in the dark. Each line feels heavy with meaning, yet slippery, like trying to catch smoke in your hands. Beware the crowned serpent, it begins, for its venom spreads in silence. Is that a literal warning about a king or tyrant, a metaphor for betrayal? Or something even stranger, the next line only deepens the mystery. The dove weeps at midnight, but the wolf wears its feathers. Cryptic imagery piles upon itself, leaving scholars arguing for centuries over what any of it truly means. Some translations suggest it's a desperate cry for help, hidden in poetic code to protect the writer. Others hear the voice of someone consumed by guilt, confessing a sin too terrible to name outright. There's a rawness to the phrasing, no polished verses here, just jagged, urgent words. One particularly chilling passage reads, "I have sown what I cannot reap, and now the crows feast in my name." Whatever happened, the writer seems trapped, maybe even doomed. Theories about its origin spin in wild directions. A few historians point to records of a noble family's downfall around the same period, suggesting the letter could be a nobleman's last warning before execution. Linguists note odd dialect choices, hinting the author might have been an outsider, someone hiding their accent along with their identity. Then there are the theologians who argue it's not political at all. That crowned serpent could refer to a biblical temptation, making this a spiritual lament. But here's what chills me most. The letter's power lies in what it doesn't say. No names, no dates, just enough detail to make you ache for context, like hearing one side of a phone call and inventing the rest. That intentional ambiguity is why it's inspired everything from Renaissance paintings to modern conspiracy theories. An artist in the 15th century depicted the weeping dove as a symbol of lost love, while a punk band in the 1980s used the same line for an album title about political corruption. And perhaps that's the point. By refusing to give us answers, the letter becomes a mirror. We see in it what we fear, what we desire, what we've lost. It's not just a relic, it's a conversation across time, one where every generation gets to whisper back their own interpretation. The parchment may be silent about who held the pen, but its words. They've never stopped speaking. To grasp why this letter is so extraordinary, we have to slip into the shoes of someone living 800 years ago. Imagine a world where parchment was precious, ink costly, and literacy a privilege held by few. Most people spent their entire lives without ever writing or reading a single word. So when someone took quill to parchment, it wasn't casual, it was deliberate, often dangerous. Every stroke of the pen carried risk. This was an era of feudal lords and towering cathedrals, where power clung to the edges of a dagger or the pages of a Bible. The church held sway over thought itself, and speaking out could mean exile or worse. Yet beneath the surface, dissent simmered. Heretics questioned doctrine, peasants revolted against crushing taxes, and nobles schemed in shadowed corridors. In such a world, anonymity wasn't just convenient, it was armor. An unsigned letter could be a weapon, a confession, or a last will etched in secrecy. Consider the writer's possible motives. A monk secretly doubting his faith might hide his identity to avoid the stake. A noblewoman trapped in a political marriage could be whispering to a lover, knowing discovery meant ruin. Or picture a scribe copying scriptures by day but penning forbidden thoughts by candlelight. Terrified his own handwriting might betray him. The very act of writing anonymously in that climate was rebellion. Yet anonymity was a double-edged sword. Without a name, a letter could be dismissed as rumor or branded as treason by those it threatened. Authorities hunted anonymous texts like predators scenting blood, burning them as heresy. That this fragile letter survived at all is miraculous. Someone, maybe a sympathetic monk, maybe a defiant librarian, chose to hide it instead of destroy it, slipping it between the pages of a sacred text like a secret prayer. The Middle Ages were also a time of symbolic language where every animal, every color held hidden meaning. Crowned serpent and weeping dove weren't just poetic flourishes, they were codes understood by some, invisible to others. A letter like this might have circulated among a select few, its true message legible only to those trained to read between the lines. For us today, it's a linguistic puzzle. But back then, it could have been a lifeline. What's haunting is how little we'll ever know for certain. The writer's world, its fears, its alliances, its silent battles, is dust now. Yet their words endure, a testament to the timeless human need to speak truth, even when truth comes at a cost. That's the true power of this letter. It's not just a relic of the Middle Ages. It's a mirror held up to every era where voices risk everything to be heard, and names are the first thing surrendered in the fight to be free. Theories about who wrote this letter are as layered as the parchment itself, each one colored by the hopes and fears of the historians who proposed them. Take the idea that the author was a woman, a voice forced into silence by a world that dismissed female intellect. In an era when even noblewomen were rarely taught to write, a secret letter could have been her only outlet, a scream into the void. The phrasing, some argue, carries a rhythm unlike the rigid formality of male scribes, more intuitive, more emotional. But is that analysis or wishful thinking? We'll never know. Then there's the disgraced knight theory, a fallen warrior penning his regrets as enemies closed in. Military historians point to phrases like, "The wolf wears its feathers," suggesting a betrayal among ranks. Could this be a coded warning about a traitor in a lord's inner circle? Or perhaps the desperate scribbles of a man stripped of his title, his honor, his very name? The parchment's hidden location fuels this idea, someone with access to a monastery's library, but not its trust. More radical still is the notion that the letter was never meant to be taken literally. Cryptographers from the 1940s noticed patterns in the word choices, hinting at an early cipher exercise. Medieval monks often practiced encoding messages, turning scripture into puzzles. Maybe this was a teacher's sample, abandoned halfway through. But why the ominous tone? Why hide a lesson in a book meant for preservation, unless the lesson itself was dangerous? What's fascinating isn't just the theories themselves, but what they reveal about us. A feminist scholar sees a woman's defiance. A military buff hears the clash of swords. A codebreaker senses a challenge waiting to be solved. The letter's anonymity acts like a blank canvas. We paint it with our own obsessions, our own longing for connection across the centuries. And that's the magic of it. Without a name, the letter belongs to everyone and no one. It's a knight's lament, a heretic's confession, a scholar's riddle, all at once. The truth may be lost to time, but the possibilities, they're endless. Modern technology has peeled back the layers of this ancient mystery like never before. When forensic experts first examined the letter under ultraviolet light, faint traces of erased words glowed on the parchment like ghostly echoes. Someone had scraped away parts of the text with meticulous care, not the hurried strokes of a censor, but the precise movements of a writer second-guessing their own message. The erased passages reveal tantalizing gaps. Before crowned serpent, the word brother appears to have been written and removed. Was this a literal sibling? A fellow monk, or a coded term for an ally turned traitor? The ink itself tells its own story. Chemists identified iron gall ink, common for the period, but with an unusual concentration of oak galls, a sign the writer may have brewed it themselves rather than using a monastery's standard supply. Even more intriguing are the barely visible fingerprints pressed into the parchment's edge. Too smudged for identification, they suggest someone handled the letter nervously, their fingers lingering where they shouldn't have. Carbon dating places the parchment squarely in the late 12th century, but the handwriting offers frustrating contradictions. While the letter forms match regional scribble styles, certain flourishes, like the exaggerated curve of the letter S, appear nowhere else in surviving manuscripts from that era. Paleographers debate whether this was an attempt to disguise one's normal handwriting or simply the quirk of a self-taught writer. Then there's the parchment's hidden history. Microscopic analysis revealed faint imprints of older text beneath the surface, suggesting the sheet was scraped clean and reused. Common practice for the time, yes, but what's chilling is the shadowy outline of a musical staff visible near the bottom. Was this page once part of a hymn book, a love song? The original content adds another layer of irony, a message about secrecy written on the ghost of someone else's words. Perhaps most unsettling are the tiny droplets of wax found embedded in the fibers, not from a seal but from a candle. This letter was written by flickering light, in haste or in hiding. Every scientific revelation pulls us closer to the truth, yet the writer's identity remains just beyond reach. The very tools that should solve the mystery only deepen it, proving some secrets are inscribed not just in ink but in time itself. When the letter first surfaced in the public eye, it didn't just make waves, it sparked a wildfire of obsession. Newspapers across Europe seized on the mystery, dubbing it the ghost's epistle, a phrase that captured the eerie allure of words without an author. Editors ran dramatic reconstructions of possible scenes, a cloaked figure slipping the letter into a book by candlelight, a trembling monk discovering it centuries later. The public couldn't get enough. Here was a puzzle wrapped in parchment, a story where every reader could become the detective. Poets and playwrights latched onto its cryptic lines, weaving them into their work like secret threads. A celebrated romantic poet penned an entire cycle of sonnets inspired by the weeping dove, turning it into a symbol of lost love. Meanwhile, a satirist in London reimagined the crowned serpent as a corrupt politician, proving the letter's words could bend to any era's anxieties. Its ambiguity was its power. Like a blank page, people projected their deepest fears onto it. A suffragette in the 19th century quoted it in speeches about silenced voices, while a surrealist painter used its imagery in a controversial exhibition on identity. The letter didn't just belong to the Middle Ages anymore, it had become a cultural chameleon. But why did this ancient scrap of paper resonate so deeply? Perhaps because it arrived at a moment when society was beginning to grapple with the weight of names and the price of visibility. The industrial age had brought newspapers, telegrams, and early photography. Suddenly, private lives could be exposed, identities commodified. In that climate, the letter's anonymity felt radical. It was a voice that refused to be pinned down, a reminder that some truths transcend the person who speaks them. Psychologists even weighed in, calling the public's reaction a collective Rorschach test. One analyst noted how rural communities interpreted the wolf in feathers as a warning about dishonest neighbors, while urban intellectuals read it as a critique of capitalism's mask. The letter's vagueness wasn't a flaw, it was the key to its immortality. It asked no loyalty to a single meaning, no fealty to a named author. It simply existed, open and defiant, inviting every generation to find itself in the spaces between the words. And that's the paradox at its core. The more people tried to claim it, to solve it, define it, own it, the more it slipped away, remaining as elusive as the hand that wrote it. Museums fought to display it, collectors offered fortunes, yet the letter resisted every frame placed around it, because its true power wasn't in being understood, but in being endless. A mirror doesn't argue with the face it reflects, it just shows us what we bring to it, and 8 centuries later we're still bringing our hopes, our dread, our unanswerable questions, holding them up to those faded brown lines, waiting for them to whisper back. The moment this ancient letter stepped into the literary world, it became more than a historical curiosity. It transformed into a living idea, shape shifting to fit the fears and fascinations of every generation. Johann Goethe was among the first to weave its mystery into his work, penning a haunting soliloquy where a character clutches an unsigned letter, whispering, "These words have no master, and so they master me." That tension between the weight of the message and the void where a name should be became a magnet for storytellers. A century later, Jorge Luis Borges would spin an entire tale around a fictional scholar obsessed with the letter, mirroring real-life historians who'd sacrificed careers trying to crack its code. Fiction and reality blurred, each feeding the other. Stage adaptations took the theme even further. In a famous 19th century opera, the aria La lettera senza nome turned the unnamed writer into a ghostly figure hovering above the stage, their voice sung by the entire chorus, a brilliant metaphor for how anonymity can make a single voice feel collective. Playwrights loved the dramatic irony. Audiences would lean in, desperate to know who wrote the lines, while characters onstage remained agonizingly unaware. It's the same thrill we get today from suspense novels where an anonymous tip drives the plot, except here, the trope traces back to a real, unsolved enigma. But why does stripping away a name give words such power? Think of the last time you found an old note in a library book, scribbled in margins by a stranger. There's an intimacy to it, as if you've been let into a secret meant for no one and everyone. Literature amplifies that feeling. When a fictional detective pores over an anonymous threat, we pore over it with them, imprinting our own fears onto those blank spaces where identity should be. The letter's influence isn't just about mimicry, it's about resonance. A medieval warning about a crowned serpent becomes a modern thriller's corrupt CEO. A weeping dove morphs into a symbol of abandoned love in a best-selling romance. Perhaps the most striking tribute came from an experimental poet in the 1960s who published a collection where every piece was titled Anonymous. Critics called it gimmicky until they noticed the epigraph, a direct quote from our 12th century letter. Suddenly, the project flipped. This wasn't just artistic rebellion. It was a lineage, a nod to the original anonymous voice that had, ironically, become famous. The letter's paradox, that by refusing to be claimed, it was claimed by everyone, kept it alive in ways its author could never have imagined. And that's the genius of its literary legacy. Most artifacts from the Middle Ages are studied behind glass, treated as relics. But this one, it's still breathing, still speaking. Every time a novelist crafts a mysterious missive or a playwright stages a scene where a character hesitates before signing their name, they're joining a conversation that began 800 years ago. The parchment may be fragile, but the idea it unleashed, that's indestructible. Artists have wrestled with this letter's enigma not through words, but through brushstrokes and chisel marks, each interpretation as varied as the theories surrounding its origins. One striking oil painting from the 1800s shows a monk's trembling hands unfurling the parchment, his face half in shadow, as if the very act of reading might damn him. The light falls only on the paper, making the words seem to glow with their own otherworldly power. Meanwhile, a modernist sculptor carved the letter into a block of obsidian, the jagged lines of text emerging like cracks in stone, a visual metaphor for how its message fractures certainty. But perhaps no artwork captures the letter's paradox better than Salvador Dali's surrealist masterpiece, where the parchment floats above a barren landscape tethered to nothing. The words drip like melting clocks, defying gravity and logic. By severing the message from any human hand, Dali forces us to confront the core question: does meaning come from who speaks or what's spoken? The painting doesn't just depict the letter, it becomes it, untethered and open to endless interpretation. This tension between creator and creation fascinates contemporary artists too. A viral digital installation projected the letter's text onto crumbling walls, the phrases flickering in and out of existence as viewers walked through them. Some reached out, trying to catch the words, only for them to dissolve. A poignant reminder that anonymity makes the message both universal and ungraspable. Another artist stitched the lines into a tapestry, then burned away sections, leaving only charred fragments. The effect, a visceral echo of how time has treated the original, frayed, incomplete, yet stubbornly enduring. What unites these works isn't just their subject, but their refusal to settle. A classical portrait might fix a face in history, but these pieces embrace the letter's elusiveness. They don't answer, they ask, and in doing so, they mirror the parchment's own journey, passed from hand to hand, century to century, always escaping final definition. The irony is delicious. An artifact that began hidden in shadows now hangs in galleries, spotlighted yet still mysterious. Perhaps that's why artists return to it again and again. In a world obsessed with authorship signatures on canvases, credits on screens, this letter represents the opposite. It's a testament to the idea that some truths don't need a name to resonate. They simply are, and when a sculptor shapes marble around those words or a painter bleeds ink to capture their weight, they're not illustrating history. They're joining it. The idea that this letter could be a forgery isn't just modern skepticism, it's a debate as old as the parchment itself. Within decades of its discovery, whispers spread that the crowned serpent was a coded attack on King Henry II, whose reign was riddled with rebellion and betrayal. Conspiracy theorists of the Middle Ages claimed the letter was planted by his enemies, a piece of political theater designed to turn the people against him. And it's not hard to see why. The timing fits, the vague menace of the language fits, but here's the catch: no one ever proved it. The lack of a signature became the ultimate shield. Accusers couldn't tie it to anyone, and defenders couldn't fully dismiss it. Jump forward to the 19th century, and a new theory emerged. What if the letter wasn't medieval at all? A notorious art forger named Edouard Vasseur boasted in his memoirs that he'd crafted the document as a young man, aging the parchment with tea stains and faking the script from old manuscripts. His confession made headlines until experts pointed out the letter had been documented in monastery records centuries before Vasseur was born. The irony. His hoax about a hoax only added to the myth, proving how easily anonymity breeds legend. Yet the physical evidence tells a different story. The ink's chemical composition matches recipes used by scribes in the 1100s, not later imitators. The parchment fibers show natural deterioration patterns consistent with 800 years of aging, not artificial weathering. Even the folds where the creases have worn through in precise, uneven ways suggest it was handled repeatedly over generations, not crafted to look old in a single lifetime. But here's what's fascinating: the doubters aren't entirely wrong, not because the letter is fake, but because its ambiguity makes it a perfect weapon. In an age where disinformation spreads faster than fact, we recognize the playbook. A nameless accusation doesn't need proof. It just needs to seed enough uncertainty to erode trust. Medieval lords knew this. Modern propagandists know it too. Whether the letter was meant to destabilize a king or simply to voice one person's anguish, Its power lies in the same void that makes internet rumors so potent today, the space where missing details become a canvas for our worst fears. That's the real lesson lurking between these ancient lines. Authentic or not, the letter exposes how easily words without a source can twist reality. It's a reminder that anonymity isn't just a shield for the powerless, it's a knife in the hands of anyone clever enough to wield it. And 8 centuries later, we're still learning how to tell the difference between a cry for help and a carefully laid trap. The anonymous letter's haunting words didn't just rattle historians, they echoed through the halls of faith, stirring debates that still divide theologians today. For some, phrases like the crowned serpent and weeping dove aren't just poetic riddles, they're divine symbols, mirroring the language of biblical prophecy. Imagine a medieval monk poring over the parchment, his pulse quickening as he recognizes echoes of Ezekiel's visions or Revelation's cryptic warnings. Could this be a lost scripture hidden by divine design, or a mortal's desperate attempt to channel heaven's voice? The timing only deepens the mystery. The late 12th century was a cauldron of religious upheaval, the Cathar heresy challenging church doctrine, whispers of reform bubbling beneath the surface. What if this letter was part of that underground current? A radical monk might have used veiled language to critique corruption without facing the stake. The crowned serpent could symbolize the papacy itself, its venom the hypocrisy of leaders who preached poverty while amassing gold. Or consider the wolf in feathers, a biting jab at false prophets. Wolves in sheep's clothing turned to fit medieval imagery. Yet not all scholars hear a rebel's cry. Some argue the letter's spiritual weight lies in its ambiguity. Unlike official church texts with clear moral directives, this message floats between condemnation and lament, its tone more Job than Jeremiah. A 14th century mystic even claimed it was written by an angel who'd forgotten its name, a story that, while fanciful, captures how the letter's lack of authorship somehow made it feel more sacred, not less. Skeptics counter with equal fervor. If this were divine, why hide it in a library rather than proclaim it from a pulpit? The church's own archivists point out that anonymous texts were often suspect, their lack of pedigree seen as a mark of heresy. Yet even they admit the letter's survival is peculiar. Normally, such unverified writings were burned. That this one was preserved, whether out of reverence or oversight, hints that someone, centuries ago, saw something in it worth protecting. The debate spills into modern faith communities. A progressive seminary in Germany uses the letter to discuss how spirituality thrives in ambiguity, while traditionalists dismiss it as a historical curiosity. Meanwhile, online forums light up with theories tying its words to modern apocalyptic movements, proving that 800 years haven't dulled humanity's hunger to find the sacred in the unexplained. What's undeniable is the letter's power to blur the line between the earthly and the eternal. Whether it's a divine whisper or a mortal's plea, its refusal to declare itself mirrors faith's greatest challenge: to believe without proof, to listen for voices that might just be the wind. In the shadow of medieval law, an unsigned letter wasn't just a curiosity, it was a crime punishable by death. Kings and bishops saw anonymity as a threat, a crack in the foundation of their control. Imagine the risk: a single parchment hidden in a book could topple reputations, spark rebellions, or accuse the powerful without consequence. That's why decrees across Europe ordered the burning of any unsigned writing on site. The very act of sending a nameless message was treated as treason, the writer's silence louder than any signature. This letter's survival isn't just luck, it's defiance. Someone somewhere chose to protect it, maybe a monk who believed its warning outweighed the law, maybe a librarian who couldn't bring himself to feed truth to the flames. The ink might have faded, but the courage behind its preservation hasn't. Think about the stakes. If caught, the keeper of this secret wouldn't just face execution. Their family, their community could be torn apart by association. Yet they hid it anyway, pressing it between sacred pages like a whispered prayer. Historians trace faint clues suggesting this wasn't an isolated act. Fragments of other anonymous letters surface in old trial records, accusations against corrupt sheriffs, pleas from serfs trapped in brutal estates. Most were destroyed, their contents lost to fire or fear. But here and there, echoes remain. A merchant's diary mentions a night letter slipped under his door, gone by dawn. A bishop's ledger notes the confiscation of blasphemous script without author. The sheer volume of these references hints at a shadow network of communication, a medieval dark web of parchment and desperation. What's chilling is how little has changed. Modern whistleblowers encrypt messages, medieval ones stripped their names. The tools evolve, but the instinct remains. When power silences dissent, anonymity becomes the last weapon of the powerless. This letter is proof that even in an age of swords and shackles, words could cut deeper than steel, especially when no one knew whose hand held the blade. And that's the irony. The laws meant to crush anonymous speech only amplified its power. By declaring these letters illegal, rulers admitted how dangerous they were. A signed accusation could be dismissed as rivalry or spite, but words from nowhere, they seeped into the collective mind, unanswerable and unforgettable. The crowned serpent didn't need a name to strike fear into kings. It just needed to survive, which, against all odds, it did. Not in a castle or cathedral, but tucked away in silence, waiting. Psychologists examining this ancient letter uncover something startling. It's not the words themselves that unsettle us, but the void where a name should be. That absence triggers something primal in the human mind, like staring into a dark doorway without knowing what waits inside. Studies show anonymous messages activate two conflicting instincts, suspicion and curiosity. We distrust what we can't trace, yet we're irresistibly drawn to fill the blank space with our own assumptions. The letter becomes a psychological mirror, reflecting not medieval fears but our own. Consider how differently people react to its cryptic lines. Some readers describe a visceral empathy, as if the writer's desperation transcends centuries. They imagine a trembling hand pressing quill to parchment, a soul so burdened they risked everything to speak, yet nothing to be known. Others feel the opposite, a creeping unease, as though the missing signature proves deceit. This split reveals a fundamental truth about anonymity. It amplifies whatever emotion we bring to it. Just as a Rorschach ink blot isn't about the image but the interpreter, the letter's power comes from our need to project meaning onto the unknown. Neuroscientists trace this response to the brain's threat detection systems. When we encounter something ambiguous, a rustle in the bushes, a muffled voice in the dark, our amygdala kicks into high alert, scanning for danger. An unsigned letter triggers the same alarm. Without a sender to evaluate, we can't gauge intent. Is this a warning or a trap, a plea or a provocation? That uncertainty forces us into detective mode, piecing together clues from phrases like crowned serpent, as if solving a crime. The irony, the more we analyze, the more we imprint ourselves onto the text, chasing shadows that might have meant nothing to the original writer. But anonymity isn't just about fear, it's about freedom. Therapists note how patients given anonymous journals often write more honestly, unshackled from the weight of being perceived. The letter embodies this paradox. By stripping away identity, the writer may have found their truest voice. Yet that same freedom unsettles receivers, leaving us to wonder, if the message has no face, does it have a soul? This tension plays out in modern digital spaces, where anonymous posts can spark movements or spread havoc. The lesson of the parchment isn't medieval, it's eternal. We hunger to know who speaks, not just what's said, because names anchor us to trust, to context, to control. When those anchors vanish, we're left floating in the deep, where every word becomes a question and every silence an answer. 800 years separate that fragile parchment from today's glowing screens, yet the dance between anonymity and power hasn't changed, only the stage. The same shadows that cloaked the medieval letter's author now hide behind encrypted chats and burner accounts. Think about it. When a whistleblower leaks documents through secure channels, they're making the same calculated choice as that long-ago writer pressing ink into hidden parchment. Protection for the vulnerable, peril for the powerful. The tools have evolved from quills to quantum encryption, but the heartbeat of the act remains identical: words without a name, carrying weight no signature ever could. Yet anonymity today wears two faces, just as it did then. For every activist using a pseudonym to expose corruption, there's a troll weaponizing the same invisibility to spread venom. The crowned serpent of the medieval letter could be a modern CEO targeted by hacktivists or a faceless account spewing hate. What's chilling is how little the moral lines have shifted. The parchment's warning about the wolf in feathers feels ripped from today's headlines, where catfishes and deepfakes weaponize disguise. We're still passing the same fundamental question: when does anonymity shield the oppressed, and when does it embolden the cruel? History offers a sly wink here. The medieval church feared anonymous texts because they couldn't control them. Fast forward to governments scrambling to regulate encrypted apps or unmask online dissent. The battle isn't about technology, it's about the age-old tension between voice and control. A 12th century monk hiding a letter in a Bible and a journalist using Signal to contact a source are kin across centuries, united by the belief that some truths must speak louder than identities. But here's where our era diverges. That ancient letter survived by sheer rarity. Parchment was precious, literacy limited. Today, anonymity scales infinitely. One viral post from a nameless account can circle the globe before historians even finish carbon dating the ink on their medieval mystery. This scale twists the stakes. The original letter's ambiguity invited interpretation. Modern anonymity often drowns in noise, its signals lost in a sea of bots and bad faith. Perhaps that's why the parchment still haunts us. In a world of algorithmic chaos, its physicality anchors the debate. You can hold it, trace the fibers, feel the weight of its silence. It reminds us that anonymity isn't inherently noble or vile, it's a mirror. The crowned serpent wasn't in the ink. It was in the eyes of those who read it then and now, and that's the thread connecting cloistered monks to keyboard warriors, the timeless human gamble that words can outlive names for better or worse. Lost letters drift through history like ghosts, unsigned love notes pressed between the pages of forgotten books, threats scrawled on tavern walls, pleas for mercy tossed from prison windows. Most crumble to dust, their stories lost, but a few survive, each a frozen whisper from someone who dared to speak but couldn't or wouldn't assign their name. A desperate mother leaves a baby at a church door with a scrap of poetry pinned to its blanket. A soldier on the eve of battle scratches a confession onto a scrap of tunic, then burns it, letting the ashes carry his guilt. These fragments haunt us precisely because they're incomplete, like torn pieces of a map leading nowhere, yet none hold the same weight as our 12th century letter. What sets it apart isn't just its age, but its artistry. Unlike hurried graffiti or tear-stained farewells, this parchment was crafted with care. The ink flows deliberately, each word chosen like a chess move. Even the folds suggest ritual. Someone took time to hide it well, ensuring it would outlast them. Compare that to an anonymous threat nailed to a medieval guildhall door. its letters jagged with rage. Both are powerful, but one is a spark, the other a slow burning fuse. Timing plays its part too. The letter emerged when parchment was precious and literacy rare. Every stroke of the quill carried risk. Later eras had pamphlets, then newspapers. Anonymous words could scatter like seeds in the wind. But this was a message carved into stone and dropped into a well, meant to be found only when the water ran dry. And then there's the mystery's longevity. A Victorian suicide note, however tragic, fades with its context, but a letter from the shadows of the Middle Ages. It becomes a mirror for every generation. Romantics see forbidden love, revolutionaries see coded rebellion. Today, we might see the birth of a meme, a viral idea stripped of its source, mutating as it spreads. The parchment endures because we keep rewriting its story, not in ink, but in our need to believe that some truths are too potent to belong to any one person. So yes, history is littered with unsigned cries, but this one, it's the rare echo that refuses to fade, because it isn't just a message from the past, it's a conversation with the future. Every time we lean closer, squinting at those faded lines, we're not just solving a riddle. We're admitting that names might anchor a message, but anonymity lets it soar. Preserving this 800-year-old whisper on parchment isn't just about protecting fragile fibers. It's a philosophical tightrope walk between memory and decay. The British Library, where the letter now resides, keeps the original in a vault worthy of a crown jewel. Zero oxygen, precise humidity, light levels so low even shadows hesitate. Touch it, unthinkable. The oils on a single fingertip could accelerate its fade into oblivion. Yet locking it away feels like another kind of erasure, as if we're burying the mystery all over again. So we've turned to technology as our mediator. Multispectral imaging peels back layers unseen by the naked eye, revealing erased words and quill strokes that tremble like a nervous pulse. These digital surrogates let scholars worldwide dissect every curve of ink without risking the original. But here's the rub: a scan can't capture the weight of the parchment in your palm. The faint scent of iron gall ink lingering like old blood. The visceral sense of holding something that survived crusades and plagues to reach you. Museums grapple with this paradox daily. Is the letter an artifact to be preserved or a story to be touched? The debate spills beyond glass cases. Some conservators argue the letter should die with dignity, its slow decay accepted as part of its truth. Others push for radical preservation, freezing it in argon gas, suspending time indefinitely. Meanwhile, artists protest both approaches, insisting the parchment's power lies in its fragility. A performance piece in Berlin recreated the letter's text on sheets of ice, letting them melt under spotlights as viewers scrambled to photograph the words before they vanished. The message, some truths resist containment, and then there's the public pressing noses to high-resolution screens, tracing pixels instead of parchment. Does it matter if the crowned serpent warning is viewed on vellum or a smartphone? For historians, perhaps, but for the rest of us, the letter's magic was never in its material. It's in the way those words, whether glowing on a monitor or fading on ancient fiber, still pry open our imagination, asking us, across 8 centuries, what we're willing to hide and what we dare to reveal. The letter's journey from crumbling parchment to pop culture icon is as enigmatic as its contents, proof that some mysteries refuse to stay buried in history books. Documentaries dissect its every word with the intensity of a crime scene investigation, while podcasts weave entire seasons around its riddles, turning medieval scribbles into binge-worthy suspense. A celebrated crime drama even dedicated an episode to a modern retelling, swapping the crowned serpent for a corrupt tech billionaire, proving the letter's themes are as adaptable as they are ancient. But why does this unsigned fragment grip us more tightly than most solved mysteries? Because it taps into a universal truth: the human mind thrives on the unresolved. Think of the last time you fell down an internet rabbit hole, chasing clues about a vanished ship or an unbreakable code. There's a thrill in the chase, a dopamine hit from piecing together fragments, even when the full picture stays just out of reach. The letter feeds that hunger perfectly. It's not just a historical artifact, it's an invitation to play detective across centuries. Armchair historians analyze its grammar like forensic linguists, while fiction writers spin alternate endings where the author is revealed to be a queen, a heretic, or even a time traveler. The lack of answers doesn't frustrate, it liberates. Without a definitive solution, every theory holds equal weight, and everyone gets to craft their own version of the truth. This obsession isn't new. From the Voynich manuscript's unreadable script to Jack the Ripper's unsolved crimes, humanity has always been drawn to enigmas that defy resolution. But our letter stands apart because it's personal. Its words feel intimate, like eavesdropping on a whispered confession. Modern retellings amplify that intimacy. A podcast host's voice trembling as they read the "wolf in feathers" line, or a documentary's haunting reenactment of the moment the parchment was found. We're not just observing a mystery, we're stepping into it, filling the silence with our own fears and fascinations. And here's the twist: the letter's pop culture fame has birthed a new layer of mystery. Conspiracy forums light up with claims that the original has been altered, its true message suppressed. A viral TikTok trend stitches the text over eerie background music, suggesting it predicts everything from political scandals to alien contact. The irony: the more we try to own the letter, to solve it, meme it, monetize it, the more it slips back into the shadows, still anonymous, still untamed. It's a reminder that the best stories aren't those with endings, but those that live in the space between question and answer, where imagination outlasts even the most determined detective. The ethical storm surrounding this letter isn't just about parchment and ink. It's a collision of two irreconcilable truths. On one side, scholars argue that anonymity was the author's last defiant act of control. To strip that away with modern forensics, they claim, would be a violation as profound as tearing open a sealed confession. Imagine a medieval writer pressing their quill into parchment, trusting silence to keep their message safe. Now picture a lab technician extracting DNA from those same fibers 8 centuries later. Is that progress or betrayal? Archivists who defend this viewpoint to the letter's survival as proof of its sacred compact it endured precisely because no one ever attached a name to its warning. Yet historians counter with equal fervor: isn't it our duty to chase every lead, no matter how faint? The past isn't a locked diary, it's a shared inheritance. They cite breakthroughs like identifying the scribe behind the Voynich manuscript's marginalia, a discovery that transformed gibberish into human struggle. For them, the letter's anonymity isn't a shield to honor, but a lock to pick. Advanced spectroscopy could trace the ink's minerals to a specific monastery. Handwriting algorithms might match quirks in the script to other documents. Even the wax droplets could hold clues about the writer's location. The tools exist. The only question is whether using them crosses a line we can't uncross. This debate spills far beyond medieval studies. Modern whistleblowers like Edward Snowden embody the same tension. When does exposing truth justify erasing privacy? Museums grapple with displaying Native American artifacts stripped of cultural context. Geneticists wrestle with sequencing the DNA of ancient remains despite descendants' objections. The letter forces us to confront a brutal question: does the hunger to solve history sometimes destroy the very thing we're trying to preserve? perhaps the most poignant perspective comes from contemporary anonymous artists. Banksy's shredded painting at auction wasn't just a stunt, it was a manifesto against ownership of art's meaning. Online poets posting under pseudonyms speak of liberation in detachment, echoing the medieval writer's choice. Their work argues that anonymity isn't absence, it's a different kind of presence. By refusing to claim their words, they let them belong to everyone and no one. Yet the counterpoint lingers. Without context, doesn't history flatten into folklore? A warning about a crowned serpent could be political satire, personal vendetta, or delusion. Each interpretation changes how we value it. The letter's power lies in its mystery, but so might its peril. What if uncovering the author revealed it was all a hoax, or worse, a tool of oppression? Some truths once seen can't be unseen. In the end, the parchment may have the final word. Its fragile fibers, its ghostly erased passages, even the way it resists certain inks, these aren't flaws. Their features a built-in expiration date for certainty. The longer we stare at those faded lines, the clearer it becomes. This isn't a puzzle to solve. It's a mirror reflecting our own obsession with putting names to shadows. And sometimes the most profound lessons lie not in the answers we dig up, but in the questions we're forced to leave buried. Translating this letter isn't just about swapping old words for new. It's like trying to catch smoke with your hands. The original text is written in a dialect that's been dead for centuries, a tangled mix of regional slang and monastic shorthand. Take the phrase, "the wolf wears its feathers." In modern English, it sounds like poetic metaphor, but in the 12th century, wolf could mean anything from a literal animal to a corrupt tax collector, while feathers might have symbolized faith, cowardice, or even a specific family crest. Every translation is a gamble, a choice between preserving rhythm or meaning, beauty or accuracy. Then there's the problem of missing context. The letter's most famous line, "Beware the crowned serpent," could be a warning about a king, a bishop, or even a medieval medical symbol for poison. One scholar argued it referenced a now-forgotten fable about a snake that stole a jeweled crown. Another insists it's a coded jab at a real nobleman whose coat of arms bore a serpent. Without knowing the writer's world, we're left stitching together clues from fragments, like reconstructing a shattered vase with half the pieces gone. Even the letter's physical quirks trip up linguists. The ink bled slightly in places, blurring key letters. Was that "dove weeps" or "dove sleeps"? A single stroke changes everything. And let's not forget the erasure's words scraped away so thoroughly only spectral traces remain under UV light. One faint ghost word might be "brother," but it's sandwiched between illegible marks. Is this a confession, a betrayal, a warning to a sibling? The ambiguity isn't a flaw, it's the point. Modern attempts to solve the letter with AI have only deepened the chaos. Algorithms trained on medieval texts spit out wildly different interpretations, each colored by the datasets they're fed. One program translated the "weeping dove" as a lament for lost peace, while another rendered it as slang for a traitor's execution. The tech reveals our uncomfortable truth. Language isn't just words, it's inside jokes we're not in on, references that died with their speakers, emotions that don't fit modern boxes. Yet this frustration is also the letter's gift. It forces us to confront how slippery communication really is, not just across centuries, but every day. Ever sent a text that was taken the wrong way, or misread a tone in an email? The letter magnifies that universal glitch in human connection. We're all always translating. Between languages, between eras, between the lines. And sometimes the most powerful messages aren't the ones we understand perfectly, but the ones that leave us leaning closer, straining to hear the whisper under the words. Folklore has a way of stitching mysteries into the fabric of everyday life, and this letter is no exception. In a small village nestled in the French Pyrenees, locals whisper that the crowned serpent refers to a tyrannical lord who once ruled their valley, a man so cruel his own wife supposedly penned the letter before fleeing into the mountains. Just a few miles away, another town insists the words were scrawled by a shepherd boy who foresaw a great plague, his warning ignored until it was too late. These aren't just stories, they're acts of collective memory, turning an ancient scrap of parchment into a mirror for local fears and triumphs. The curse theories are even wilder. A German monastery still displays a replica of the letter behind glass, alongside a ledger claiming anyone who reads it aloud will suffer misfortune. Tourists chuckle until they hear about the 1920s scholar who transcribed it and died weeks later in a bizarre train accident, or the 1984 radio host who aired a dramatic reading, only for his station to mysteriously burn down the next day. Coincidence, absolutely, but try telling that to the superstitious hearts who have woven the letter into their folklore like a dark fairy tale. What's fascinating isn't the truth of these myths, but why they stick. The letter's ambiguity acts like a blank space on a map, inviting communities to fill it with their own monsters and heroes. Coastal towns reimagine the weeping dove as a ship lost at sea. Mining villages spin tales of the wolf in feathers as a greedy foreman who stole workers' wages. Each version says less about medieval history and more about the people telling it, their struggles, their villains, their need to make sense of the unexplained. Even holidays have sprung up around it. In a Czech festival, children wear masks of serpents and doves, reenacting the letter's lines in street plays. An Italian village releases paper lanterns each year inscribed with anonymous wishes, a tradition they swear dates back to the letter's discovery. These rituals aren't just keeping the mystery alive, they're proof that folklore doesn't preserve history, it reinvents it, stitching the past to the present with threads of imagination. And perhaps that's the letter's greatest legacy. It's no longer just an artifact in a climate-controlled vault. It's a living story reshaped by every generation that encounters it. The original parchment may fade, but the tales it inspires, they're etched in something far more durable than ink, the human need to find meaning in the mysterious and magic in the mundane. What happens when a story has no author to anchor it? Scientists studying memory and oral tradition have turned to this anonymous letter as the perfect laboratory for understanding how narratives morph when their origins are obscured. In controlled experiments, researchers gave one group of participants the letter with its true medieval context, while another received it as a nameless artifact. Over weeks of retelling, the anonymous version sprouted wild new details: a doomed love affair, a secret royal birth, even supernatural curses. Without the weight of a known author, the story became putty in the hands of collective imagination. This phenomenon isn't just academic curiosity, it's wired into our brains. Cognitive psychologists point to something called source amnesia, where our minds struggle to separate facts from their origins. When a tale has no clear starting point, we unconsciously patch the gaps with familiar tropes and personal biases. Think of it like a medieval game of telephone, where each whisper down the chain adds another layer of embroidery. The letter's crowned serpent might have begun as a political metaphor, but after passing through enough retellings, it becomes a literal dragon guarding a cursed treasure. The absence of a signature doesn't weaken the story, it sets it free to evolve. Historians of oral tradition see parallels in ancient epics like Homer's Odyssey, where centuries of anonymous retellings transformed a simple voyage into a tapestry of monsters and gods. But here's the twist. While most oral traditions fade once written down, the letter's physical form creates a unique tension. Its words are frozen in ink, yet their meaning remains fluid. Folklorists tracking its influence note how rural communities grafted it onto local legends. In one alpine village, the weeping dove became a ghostly maiden weeping for her lost shepherd, while a Baltic fishing town recast the wolf in feathers as a storm spirit disguised as a seabird. Neuroscientists take it further, using brain scans to show how anonymous narratives activate different regions than attributed ones. Without a known author, our default mode network, the same system responsible for daydreaming and empathy, lights up like a festival lantern. We don't just hear the story, we co-create it, filling the void with whispers of our own subconscious. That's why the letter's lines feel so eerily personal. They're not just words on parchment, but empty vessels we can't help but fill. The implications ripple far beyond medieval studies. Marketing researchers analyze how anonymous online reviews shape perceptions more than signed ones, while social psychologists study rumor propagation in crises. At its core, the letter is a 800-year-old case study in a timeless truth. When the source disappears, the story doesn't vanish, it multiplies. And perhaps that's the most fascinating experiment of all, watching how a single piece of parchment, stripped of its author, became a canvas for humanity's endless hunger to weave meaning from mystery. Does meaning die when the author disappears, or does it finally breathe free? This ancient letter forces us to confront one of philosophy's oldest dilemmas: whether a message is bound by the hand that wrote it, or if its true power lies in the space where the creator steps away. The French theorist Roland Barthes famously argued that a text's birth coincides with its author's symbolic death, that once words leave their maker, they belong not to the writer but to the reader. Our parchment embodies this radical idea more viscerally than any abstract essay ever could. Stripped of its author's identity, the letter becomes a chameleon, shifting meaning with every pair of eyes that trace its faded lines. A medieval peasant might have seen divine prophecy in its warning of a crowned serpent, while a modern scholar detects political satire. Without a name to anchor interpretation, the words stretch across time like a bridge with no fixed endpoint. Think of the last unsigned note you encountered, a scrawled confession in a library book, a cryptic posted on your windshield, that flicker of curiosity you felt. It's the same spark that's kept this letter alive for centuries. When we don't know who's speaking, we listen differently. There's no reputation to color our judgment, no biography to constrain the possibilities. The weeping dove isn't just a metaphor, it's an empty vessel waiting for our tears to fill it. That's why artists and activists have weaponized anonymity throughout history, from the samizdat literature of Soviet dissidents to the masked protesters of Anonymous. The nameless voice carries a unique authority precisely because it can't be discredited or dismissed as biased. Its pure message, untainted by messenger. Yet this freedom comes at a cost. Without context, we risk grafting our own biases onto the text like ivy on a ruin. Nietzsche warned that when we stare into the abyss stares back, and so it is with anonymous words. The letter's warning about the wolf in feathers could be a critique of clerical hypocrisy, a lover's lament, or the ravings of a paranoid mind. We'll never know. Some philosophers argue this ambiguity is the letter's greatest gift. Like a Rorschach blot, it reveals not medieval truths but our own obsessions. A conservative historian might see a call to tradition in its lines, while a radical reads rebellion. The parchment doesn't change, we do. There's a haunting beauty in this instability. Most artifacts from the Middle Ages come with labels: King Henry's sword, Abbess Hildegard's hymn. But this letter floats in the void between certainty and imagination, challenging our craving for tidy origins. It asks us to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, to find meaning not in the author's intent, but in the conversation their words provoke across time. Maybe that's why it endures when so many signed documents crumble into obscurity. The absence at its center isn't a flaw, it's the engine of its immortality. A named text belongs to its era, an anonymous one, it belongs to whoever dares to listen. The letter's whisper across time isn't confined to European cloisters and castles. Its echoes resonate in every corner of the world, proving anonymity isn't a cultural fluke but a human reflex. Centuries before this parchment was hidden in a monastery, Chinese scholars penned unsigned critiques of emperors on slips of bamboo, burying them in communal wells where water carriers would spread their words like underground rivers. In West Africa, griots still recite centuries-old poems attributed only to the voice of the wind, their original authors erased by design. And among the Haudenosaunee nations, wampum belts carried messages between tribes without signatures because the weight of truth wasn't tied to the speaker, but to the collective ear. What binds these traditions isn't just the absence of names. It's the recognition that some messages need to float free of identity to do their work. A 12th century monk warning of a crowned serpent and a Ming dynasty dissident comparing the emperor to a tiger share the same instinct. When power silences dissent, anonymity becomes the last bridge between truth and survival. Even the forms mirror each other. Just as the European letter was folded into a book, Japanese courtiers slipped unsigned poems into bamboo tubes tied to cherry trees, letting spring rains blur the ink until the words felt like they'd been written by the season itself. The parallels go deeper than tactics. In India's Bhakti movement, female poets like Lal Ded wrote verses so critical of societal norms that they attributed them to the Nameless One, knowing their ideas would outlive their identities. Half a world away, pre-Columbian Mixtec codices depict royal scandals through animal avatars, jaguars and quetzals, standing in for rulers whose sins couldn't be named directly. The imagery is different, but the impulse is identical. Truth wrapped in metaphor, danger defanged by detachment. Anthropologists call this the veil of collective voice, a phenomenon where cultures with no contact invent near-identical strategies to protect speakers. The Algonquin tribes of North America used dream visions as political critique, framing warnings as messages from ancestors rather than living mouths. Meanwhile, in medieval Persia, satirists wrote under the pseudonym Nobody, knowing a joke attributed to no one could mock a caliph more safely than one tied to a name. The specifics vary, but the pattern holds. Anonymity isn't the exception. It's the rule. Modern technology has only magnified this ancient dance. From Tibetan protesters spreading unsigned pamphlets under China's surveillance to Nigerian bloggers using VPNs to expose corruption, the tools evolve, but the heartbeat remains. Even in places where oral tradition dominates, like the Pacific Islands, elders speak of ghost stories that everyone knows were really about living chiefs, a way to critique power without becoming its target. So was our medieval letter ahead of its time, or proof that time is circular? The answer might lie in a Navajo saying, "A word thrown into the canyon returns as many voices." The parchment's power wasn't in its novelty, but in its universality. Whether inked on vellum or whispered between market stalls, anonymity is humanity's oldest megaphone, a way to shout truths too dangerous to claim, yet too vital to silence. Digital sleuths armed with spectral imaging software and neural networks have dragged this medieval mystery into the 21st century, transforming dusty parchment into a viral puzzle. Online forums dissect each stroke of faded ink like detectives at a crime scene, while machine learning algorithms churn out eerie completions of the fragmented text. AI generated guesses at what might have followed. The wolf wears its feathers. Some of these digital reconstructions read like medieval poetry. Others veer into surreal dream logic, proving even silicon minds struggle with the letters' riddles. Platforms like Reddit host sprawling threads where linguists and amateur enthusiasts clash over comma placements, arguing whether a faint smudge represents an erased word or just centuries of wear. The line between scholarship and fan fiction blurs as users stitch elaborate backstories for the nameless author, turning crowd-sourced speculation into a kind of collaborative historical fiction. But technology's role isn't just creative, it's forensic. Hyperspectral imaging at Oxford's Bodleian Library recently revealed chemical traces in the ink suggesting the writer dipped their quill multiple times, pausing mid-sentence as if interrupted or overcome. Meanwhile, a Swedish team trained an AI on thousands of medieval scripts, hoping to match the letters' quirks to known scribes. The results were equal parts thrilling and frustrating. The algorithm flagged similarities to 7 different hands across Europe, proving anonymity was as much a craft as a choice. Even the parchment itself has gone under the digital knife, with 3D modeling exposing microscopic needle holes along one edge, evidence it was once stitched into a larger document, now lost. Yet for every breakthrough, technology sows fresh chaos. Deepfake calligraphy tools allow anyone to generate new medieval letters with a click, muddying the waters with plausible forgeries. A notorious hoax in 2019 saw a fabricated sister letter surface online, its faux Old English warning about a silver spider, duping several academics before being debunked. Meanwhile, blockchain enthusiasts have attempted to solve the mystery by auctioning NFT interpretations, reducing 8 centuries of enigma to a crypto bidding war. The letter's digital afterlife reflects our era's paradox. We possess more tools than ever to uncover the past, yet more ways to distort it. What's mesmerizing isn't just the tech itself, but how it mirrors the letter's original journey. Just as some medieval monk tucked this message between sacred pages, hoping future hands would find it, we now upload scans to the cloud, trusting algorithms and strangers to carry the mystery forward. The parchment's resilience lies in its adaptability. It's been hidden in books, debated in taverns, displayed under museum glass, and now lives anew in the glow of smartphone screens. Each medium refracts its meaning differently, like light through stained glass. The crowned serpent that once warned of tyrants now trends as a meme about corporate greed. The weeping dove inspires digital art projects about modern loneliness. Perhaps this is the ultimate irony. A message meant to exist outside of time has become a timestamp for every era it touches. The writer who chose anonymity over immortality couldn't have known their words would outlast empires, not despite their namelessness, but because of it. In an age where every thought is archived and monetized, the letter's refusal to belong to anyone feels radical. It drifts through digital spaces like its original parchment, once drifted through history untethered, contested, and endlessly alive. The most haunting part of this centuries-old mystery isn't what we know. It's what we'll never uncover. Take the parchment's journey. Did trembling hands pass it secretly to its intended recipient, or was it hidden before reaching its target? Forensic analysis shows no seal marks, no traces of wax that might indicate it was ever fastened shut. The folds are crisp, suggesting it may have been tucked away immediately after writing, like a confession bottled up before the words could do their work. Historians spar over this detail. Some insist the lack of wear proves it was never read, while others argue the pristine condition means it was received exactly as intended, in absolute secrecy. Then there's the gut-wrenching question of comprehension. Assuming it reached someone, did they grasp the warning about the crowned serpent? Medieval codes were often layered with meanings known only to specific circles, like whispering in a crowded room using childhood nicknames. The erased word before brother could imply the recipient was part of an intimate group, privy to references lost to time. Or perhaps the message was deliberately opaque, designed to make sense only when paired with information we no longer possess. Imagine standing in a 12th century chamber, squinting at those jagged lines by flickering torchlight, the weight of understanding or misunderstanding hanging in the air. The letter's survival adds another wrinkle. Most clandestine correspondence from this era was destroyed upon reading, burned to protect both sender and receiver. That this one endured suggests either a catastrophic failure in delivery, left forgotten like a modern text message gone unsent, or a deliberate act of preservation. Some scholars propose the recipient recognized its significance and hid it for posterity, gambling that future eyes might decode what theirs could not. Others paint a darker picture. What if the intended reader never got the chance to act? The letter's cryptic tone could imply imminent danger, its warning arriving just too late. These gaps in the story aren't flaws, they're the engine of its immortality. Solved mysteries gather dust, unsolved ones gather legends. The Voynich manuscript's unreadable pages draw more pilgrims than decoded medieval ledgers. Jack the Ripper's unnamed victims haunt us more than documented crimes. Our brains are wired to chase what flees, to prize the almost grasped over the held. This letter mastered that alchemy, transforming absence into presence. Where a signature would have anchored it to one time, one person, its anonymity lets it speak anew to each generation. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson lurking in those stained fibers. In an age where every thought is archived, tagged, and monetized, there's radical power in leaving some stories unfinished. The letter doesn't just remind us that history is full of holes, it shows how those holes become windows, letting us project our own fears, hopes, and unanswered questions onto the past. The truth may be lost, but the wondering, that's forever. From a scrap of parchment to a cultural icon, this unnamed whisper from the past holds up a mirror to our own digital age. Think about it. 800 years ago, someone pressed ink into fragile fibers, gambling that their words would outlive their name. Today, we tap out tweets and texts with that same gamble, sending fragments of ourselves into the unknown. The difference, our messages vanish with a swipe, while this letter clung to history like a burr to fabric. Its survival feels like a quiet rebellion against the disposable nature of modern communication, proving that some truths refuse to be ephemeral. What's striking isn't just the letter's endurance, but how its anonymity turned it into a collaborative masterpiece. Like a medieval version of open-source code, its lack of ownership invited every generation to remix its meaning. A monk in the 1300s might have seen divine prophecy in its lines, while a Victorian scholar projected Gothic romance onto its shadows. Today, digital sleuths scan its pixels for hidden patterns, and TikTokers stitch its phrases onto modern anxieties. The parchment didn't just survive, it evolved, mutating like a virus of the imagination. Yet there's a tension here. In an era obsessed with attribution, credits, copyrights, verified badges, the letter's namelessness feels radical. It challenges the notion that value hinges on identity. Banksy shreds a painting at auction, anonymous activists topple statues under cover of darkness, and suddenly, we're back in that medieval scriptorium, wrestling with the same question: does a message need a maker to matter? The irony is delicious. Our tools for tracking and monetizing every creative act have only made the letter's defiance more potent. So what's next for this ancient enigma? Maybe AI will one day decode its erased words, or a dusty archive will cough up a lost companion text. But perhaps the real magic lies in the unsolved. Like a fire that never burns out, the mystery keeps warming new hands. Every Reddit thread analyzing its ink, every artist reinterpreting its symbols, every kid stumbling upon it in a history book, they're all adding another layer to the palimpsest. As you close this video and return to a world of usernames and watermarks, let that parchment linger in your mind. It's more than a relic, it's an invitation. To listen for voices without faces, to value words over warrants, and maybe, just maybe, to leave something behind that speaks louder than your name ever could. The comment section's open. What do you think the crowned serpent was warning us about? Drop your theories below, and if you love unraveling history's loose threads, hit subscribe. The past isn't finished.